rate, what I thought we would do in this panel is talk about how AI changes our governance, our societies, the way we live, not just in business, but democracy, law, things like that. And I wanted to start with Lily, who has a lot of experience, both in the US, of course, and in Africa, but also in China. And what do you see happening, and what are the sort of dangers that you see?
Yeah, thanks. There's a lot going on in the world right now. There's a lot of economic and social uncertainty. We're in a period of global polycrises. This makes people anxious and vulnerable to populists and demagogues who want to take advantage of our vulnerability. And it means that if they promise us social and moral order, we might take their offer and be okay with dismantling democratic institutions. At the same time, social media companies have kind of partly stumbled into creating the perfect conditions for autocrats and demagogues to take advantage. If I'm an autocrat, I think this is great. I don't have to tell the truth in order to get more likes and shares on Facebook and Twitter. I don't have to account for my performance in office, and I don't have to explain the rationales for my policy positions. I just have to make people angry and afraid and then tell them, I hear you, I respect you, and I'm going to do something about it. And moreover, I can create a social media mob to discipline anybody in my party that goes against me, and there's no due process on anything I do on social media. So again, this is great. The irony is that the crises that are making us more anxious and afraid are actually also preventing us from coming together collectively to figure out the solutions to solve those crises. The extremes on social media just keep getting more extreme. The moderate majority is disappearing from the conversation, both because they're exhausted and also because they're afraid if they say something that draws attention, are slower, cooler, and less viral.
And so AI actually could either accelerate or mediate this.
Exactly. So, we at MIT, as you know, have been thinking really carefully about the directions in which AI and generative AI could be integrated into new kinds of online spaces for deliberation and democracy. So a couple of possibilities might be something like AI chatbots that pop up and are essentially our personal assistants in advising us what are the kinds of comments that we could usefully make in order to bring convergence and compromise? What are ways in which we could actually change people's minds and have them be heard? Another possibility is to use AI in summarizing and visualizing conversations so that moderate majority becomes visible to people, and we can see that perhaps those on the extremes are actually on the periphery.
And in experiments, we've sort of shown that a lot of this can really work.
Exactly. I mean, there's preliminary evidence, so it's a matter of designing and testing going forward.
So, Gerard, so you are the lead author for the EU AI Act that just recently got approved and now is being refined, and they're thinking about how to implement it. What's your view on all of this? Because Europe has a very particular view, and you are in the hot seat of actually carrying this out.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sandy. Indeed, these are, to go a step back, when we started thinking about the AI Act, we did not necessarily have in mind, or at the center of our thinking, exactly this type of questions around democracy, around the electoral processes, and so on. And there was a reason for that. It's because as we started thinking about the AI Act, the Act was just one tool in the regulatory ecosystem of the EU that will have to deal with certain challenges. And when we think about the challenge around, for instance, social media, democratic processes, public discourse, this is certainly one of the key challenges that is addressed by the so-called Digital Services Act, which entered into force already in the EU and regulates the conduct and the activity of the platforms, the big platforms, with varying levels of obligations. Therefore, the AI Act initial essence was not to cater for this type of problems, but more for problems related, for instance, to the safety, to the impact on fundamental rights, like, for instance, discrimination and so on. That doesn't mean, however, that we completely sort of thought that the Act should not contribute to that space. And that's the reason why we foresaw, among others, it's a very long proposal, very long regulation, now it's even longer, but we foresaw specific transparency obligations when it comes to generated content. Very briefly, I think, that ChatGPT emerged after the Commission proposal was out. And I think some of the criticism that was made to the Commission was, oh, you have not factored in, generative AI in your proposal. That is not quite true, in the sense that, on the one hand, we created a definition of AI that was broad enough to cater for the generation of content. And that's one important distinction to make. And the second one is that we have foreseen in that specific obligation to ensure transparency of generated content, notably audio, video, and sound. Need a risk of deception.
So you're talking about things that are generically referred to as deep fakes and so forth. And one of the things that's been really remarkable is that usually regulation takes a very long time to emerge. Like regulation about social media probably took 20 years to really make it. Whereas AI regulation, starting from the sort of popularity of the modern generation of stuff, is like a year. So people are on it. It's amazing, right? So that must have been an interesting roller coaster.
Yeah, I started working on the proposal in 2019, end of 2019.
Yeah.
And the proposal was out in April 2021.
I remember when we were doing GDPR, which started here also.
Yes.
It was like a decade before it actually got to serious consideration. It was very frustrating. So let me turn to Robert here. So Robert, you're at JD thinking about AI, and you have some ideas about how we can make law be more agile, more appropriate to help these things out. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're working on is this idea of regulation by design. AI systems are really good at being optimized towards certain goals. And so we're thinking, well, if we can figure out what kinds of harms we really want to guard against, the kind of harms that are measurable, design metrics for those, and then optimize systems around kind of from the beginning preventing those harms. And so this is kind of an old idea. Elijah Otis, who's the inventor of the passenger elevator, the way he demonstrated the elevator worked is he stood on the platform, he cut the rope, and the elevator stopped, right? And the system was designed by, from the engineering, from the fundamentals, that if everything goes wrong, you stop. GDPR did the same thing with privacy by design, right? Urging people to design systems to be private from the get-go, right? Like thinking about privacy not as an afterthought, but ex ante. And so we're trying to think, okay, can we broaden that idea and design AI systems to achieve regulatory objectives from the very start? And can we, talk to and create a dialogue between regulators and the developers of these AI systems to think about, well, how do we tune these AI systems to not just like, ex post prevent harms, but actually strive towards avoiding harms, right? Strive towards benefiting people. And the key thing there is thinking about measurable risks, right? And designing metrics around measuring the key risks that we're worried about.
So I had an interview earlier today with Jeremy Allaire, who runs Circle. And so the idea is he's got this stable coin that, is pegged to the dollar. But then on top of that, they're running DeFi, which is these AI algorithms for trading. And that's really scary, is that you could have billions of dollars changing hands on these schemes within milliseconds. So there's no humans involved, and it could be across lots of borders. And one of the things that's really clear is that law is way too slow, and the regulatory process is like orders of magnitude too slow. So is this the sort of thing that we need to do? What do we need to do to deal with those sorts of AI?
So it's really impossible to kind of design metrics for unknown unknowns, right? So the kind of black swan risks that people worry about, say, in the DeFi space are really hard to prevent. But there are other things like, copyright issues. Well, we know it's an issue. We know that like outputs that resemble pieces of training data are an issue. We don't want to disenfranchise creators. So we can think about designing AI systems that kind of by design think about copyright law the way that we've been enforcing it, which is about substantial similarity between things, asking like regular everyday people, is this output similar to that output? And so you could imagine like layers on top of AI systems that say, okay, let's compare these outputs. Let's prevent outputs that are too similar, or at least alert users to the fact that, hey, this output is really similar to this other output. Was that an intentional thing? Are you aware that there could be a copyright infringement issue here? Things like that.
I think all the people at MIT who are going to be examined for copying other people, right, are going to be interesting. So Lily, do you think that this type of thing might be useful in helping government systems, democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is exactly the kind of direction that we should be going in. I've been thinking a lot about something that Abraham Lincoln said when he became president just before the American Civil War, about how we need to make sure that the better angels of our nature prevail in order to keep our country and society together. And I think it's efforts like these that we're all engaged in, actually, in figuring out how to make AI cultivate the better angels of our nature and have us be our best selves. So whether it's regulatory frameworks or like thinking about how law might work or thinking about how democratic deliberation might work.
Gabrielle, what do you think?
Yeah, I share their views, and I think, of course, the laws has as an inherent sort of flaw in the sense that it doesn't proceed as fast as technology, but the law, on the other hand, has the benefit of the democratic legitimacy. And I think this is also something that, in the EU, we also are very keen on, in the sense that it may take a bit longer. Actually, the AI Act was, as you're right, it didn't take that long. But sometimes it's good somehow to take a bit long to be sure that we have everyone is buying in, because ultimately the law also has this ability to shape the direction of the behavior of people. And sometimes there are even positive externalities in that sense, which you don't necessarily always have to sanction behavior, but you can also, with the law, also indicate like positive directions. And that, I think, in that does also positive aspects.